Ask almost anyone for the greatest live performance in the history of rock, and you'll hear the same answer. 20 minutes, Queen, Live Aid, 1985. A man in a white vest owning a stadium of 72,000 people, and through the cameras, close to 2 billion more watching around the world. It looks effortless. It looks like a band at the absolute peak of its powers, doing what came naturally. But here is what nobody tells you. When Queen walked onto that stage, they were not the biggest band in the world anymore. They were a band a lot of people had quietly written off, past their best, yesterday's act. And those 20 perfect minutes were not spontaneous magic. They were the most carefully planned, most obsessively rehearsed, most calculated 20 minutes of the band's entire life. While other acts treated Live Aid as a casual jam, Queen treated it like a mission. This is the story of how a band that thought it was fading walked onto the biggest stage in history and on purpose stole the show from everyone.
To understand why it mattered so much, you have to understand where Queen actually stood in 1985. Because from the inside, it did not feel like they were on top of the world. It felt like the world had started to move on. A few years earlier, they'd released an album called Hot Space, a big swerve towards funk and dance, and a lot of their rock fans had recoiled from it. In America especially, their momentum had stalled badly. The hits weren't landing the way they used to. The press had begun to talk about them in the past tense. There was even real tension inside the band about direction, about whether the magic was slipping. They had been the biggest thing in the world once. Now there was a quiet, uncomfortable question hanging over them. Were Queen finished? That's the state of mind they were in when the phone call came. Not a band coasting on greatness, a band with something to prove, and a growing fear that their best days were behind them. Which, as it turns out, is exactly the most dangerous kind of band to put in front of 2 billion people.
The call was for Live Aid, and Live Aid was unlike anything that had ever been attempted. Bob Geldof had pulled together the biggest names in music for a single day, 2 stadiums, London and Philadelphia, to raise money for famine relief in Ethiopia. It would be broadcast live by satellite to more countries at once than any event in the history of television. The audience was almost incomprehensible. Something close to 1.5, maybe 2 billion people watching the same thing at the same moment. Every major act on Earth was on the bill, and every one of them got the same deal, a short slot, around 20 minutes, no encores, no exceptions, a hard clock ticking the whole time. For most of the artists, that was a fun, loose, once-in-a-lifetime charity gig. Turn up, play a couple of songs, be part of history. But Freddie Mercury and the rest of Queen looked at that same 20-minute slot and saw something completely different. They saw the single biggest audience any performer would ever have. 2 billion people, many of whom had started to forget about them. And they decided they were not going to waste 1 second of it.
Because here is the part that separates Queen from almost everyone else that day. While other acts rehearsed loosely or barely rehearsed at all, Queen prepared like their lives depended on it. They rehearsed for days. They didn't plan to play songs, they planned to play a medley, the very best bits of their very best hits, stitched together so there was never a dull moment, never a lull, never a stretch where a casual viewer might reach for the remote. And they made a ruthless decision that turned out to be genius. They would sacrifice whole songs. They would play only the parts that hit hardest, cut them short, and move straight to the next peak. 20 minutes, almost entirely made of choruses and climaxes. Freddie understood something the others didn't fully grasp. This was not a concert for the people in the stadium alone, it was a television event. He planned to perform for the cameras, for the living rooms, for the billion strangers who would decide in the first 30 seconds whether to keep watching. They even made sure the sound would punch through. Nothing about what looked spontaneous was left to chance. They walked out there with a plan to conquer the planet, and a setlist engineered to do exactly that.
And then it happened. Early evening, the 13th of July, the sun still up over Wembley. Queen walked out. Freddie sat down at a grand piano and played those first few familiar notes, and something shifted in the air. What followed is now legend. The band tore through the peaks of their catalogue with a precision that should have felt mechanical and instead felt electric. One enormous song folding into the next, each one arriving right at its biggest moment. The crowd, 72,000 strong, was moving as a single organism within seconds. And at the center of it stood Freddie, in a plain white vest and jeans, doing the thing almost no other performer in history could do. He wasn't just singing to that stadium. He was conducting it. Every gesture landed, every pause was timed. He would stride to the edge of the stage, plant himself, and the entire crowd would follow his every move like he was pulling them on strings. The band behind him was flawless, locked in, feeding the whole thing forward. But it was one particular moment, one single sound, that would come to define the day, and arguably define live performance itself. The moment Freddie decided to stop singing and make the world sing back.
It's remembered now simply as the note. Midway through the set, Freddie stepped up and instead of singing a lyric, he sang a single wordless sound out into the stadium, just a vocal call, and then he held the microphone out toward 72,000 people and waited, and they sang it back, perfectly. So he did it again, a little higher, a little more complex, and they answered again, back and forth, a man and a stadium, call and response, until he pushed his voice up into a soaring, impossible note and let it ring out across Wembley. For a few seconds, one man had the complete, undivided attention and obedience of one of the largest crowds ever assembled, and through the cameras, of most of the human beings awake on the planet. It has been called the note heard around the world, and what makes it extraordinary isn't just the sound, it's the sheer casual command of it. He wasn't performing for the crowd, he had become the crowd's leader. No pyrotechnics, no screens full of effects, just a voice and a total, almost frightening mastery over tens of thousands of people. That is a thing you cannot rehearse. That part was pure Freddie.
When it was over, there was really no argument about what had happened. Queen had walked into the biggest talent contest in the history of the world, a bill stacked with every legend alive, and they had won it, comprehensively. Musicians who were there, watching from the side of the stage, have spoken about it ever since with a kind of awe. Bob Geldof, the man who built the whole day, has said plainly that Queen were the best act at Live Aid, that they understood exactly what the event was and rose to meet it. Other artists reportedly watched them and quietly understood they'd been beaten. And the reason wasn't magic. This is the thing worth holding on to. The reason Queen stole the show was the preparation nobody saw, combined with a frontman who was simply built for a stadium in a way that maybe no one before or since has been. The songs helped, of course. They had spent a decade writing anthems designed to be sung by enormous crowds, and now here was the most enormous crowd of all time, ready-made to sing them. Everything they had ever done had, almost by accident, been training for exactly these 20 minutes.
And it changed everything for them. In the days after Live Aid, something remarkable happened. People went out and bought Queen records again. Their back catalogue surged. A band that had been drifting toward the exit was suddenly, overnight, relevant again, wanted again, on top again. The performance had done what no album campaign or interview could. It had reminded the entire world in 20 undeniable minutes exactly what this band was. And as the years passed, its legend only grew. It topped poll after poll as the greatest live performance in rock history. It became the yardstick that every other performance gets measured against. And decades later, when a film about Freddie's life needed a triumphant ending, It didn't invent one. It simply recreated Live Aid, almost shot for shot. And a new generation discovered why those 20 minutes matter. The band that thought it might be finished had instead delivered the single most famous live performance ever given. They didn't just save the day, they rewrote their own ending. The comeback wasn't a slow climb. It was 20 minutes long.
So, the next time you watch that footage, and it looks so easy, so natural, so effortlessly perfect, remember what you're actually seeing. You're not watching a band coast on greatness. You're watching a band that was scared of being forgotten, that outthought and outprepared and outworked every legend on that bill, and then delivered it with a frontman who could hold 2 billion people in the palm of his hand. The effortlessness was the whole illusion. Underneath it was days of rehearsal, a ruthlessly clever plan, and a lifetime of learning how to make a crowd feel like one person. Freddie Mercury walked onto that stage with something to prove, and he proved it so completely that we're still talking about it, still watching it, still handing it to our children as the definition of what a performer can be. If you'd like to hear the real stories behind the songs and the moments you thought you already knew, stay with us. There's a whole catalogue of them, and every single one hides more than you'd think. The next time you watch those 20 minutes, look past the magic and see the man who left absolutely nothing to chance.